To the 2 billion Muslims across the globe, the Quran is the literal speech of God. During these video series, I am going to explain different facets of the Quran to prove it cannot be written by man. Skeptics think that the Quran was invented and written by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. If that was the case, why would he reprimand and censure himself? Let's examine places in the Quran where God reprimanded his prophet for making decisions that God did not agree with. During a minor marital dispute between 2 wives of the prophet, one of the wives told the prophet that an unpleasant odor was coming from his mouth after he had drunk honey at the other wife's house. At this, the prophet took an oath never to drink honey again. Right after that oath, God revealed the verse, "O prophet, why do you prohibit yourself from what Allah has made lawful for you, seeking the approval of your wives?" Surah 66, verse 1. When the prophet adopted his son, Zayd, he changed his last name to be Muhammad. This was not something God legislated, and thus revealed the following verse to make the prophet reinstate his biological father's name. Nor does he regard your adopted children as your real children. These are only your baseless assertions, but Allah declares the truth, and He alone guides to the right way. Let your adopted children keep their family names. That is more just in the sight of Allah. Surah 33, verse 4 and 5. During a battle, a group of the hypocrites asked the prophet to be excused from participating. The prophet allowed them to stay behind and they didn't participate in the battle, after which the following verse from the Quran was revealed. May Allah pardon you, O Muhammad. Why did you give them permission to remain behind? You should not have, until it was evident to you who were truthful and you knew who were the liars. Surah 9, verse 43. After the first ever battle between the Meccans and the Prophet, prisoners of war were taken by the Muslims. Prisoners of war constituted a problem awaiting resolution because it was a new phenomenon in the history of Islam. The Prophet decided to ransom those who could afford it. The ones who couldn't were asked to teach reading and writing to 10 children, while others were released as they couldn't do either. The Prophet was rebuked by God for taking prisoners because many of these prisoners were ex-war criminals, and since the Muslims were a minority, this showed weakness. Many of these prisoners came back to fight in the following battles as well. The verse that rebuked the prophet was as follows: "It is not fitting for a prophet to take captives until he has sufficiently suppressed the enemies in the land. You merely seek the gains of the world, whereas Allah desires for you the good of the hereafter. Allah is almighty, all-wise. Had there not been a decree that had already been given by Allah, you would have incurred a severe chastisement in consequence of what you have taken." Surah 8, verse 67 and 68. On one occasion, the Prophet was sitting with some of the Meccan leaders. He was trying to persuade them to accept Islam. At that moment, his blind companion approached him, not knowing that the Prophet was occupied, and insisted that he teach him something of the Quran. The Prophet ignored him because if the leaders of Mecca followed Islam, others would as well. When the blind companion persisted in his request, the Prophet's face showed signs of displeasure as he did not wish to be interrupted. Even though the blind man was not aware of the Prophet's feelings, who did not express with words what he felt. Yet the following verse was revealed to censure the Prophet. The Prophet frowned and turned away because there came to him the blind man. But what would make you perceive, O Muhammad, that perhaps he might be purifying or be reminded, and the remembrance would benefit him? As for he who thinks himself without need, to him you give attention. and not upon you is any blame if he will not be purifying. But as for he who came to you striving for knowledge and he fears Allah, from him you are distracted. No. Indeed, these verses are a reminder. Surah 80, verse 1 to 12. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.